A popular prophecy that has carried into the spirit of this age is of the Antichrist. Is the Antichrist an actual being? Is it more than one being? Or is it even real? So today I'm going to be explaining the esoteric meaning of the Antichrist. Although this term Antichrist does have an esoteric meaning behind it, it's first important to know why this term, Antichrist, was invented. And why it was created was because it was used to diminish and to slander political opponents of certain sects of Christianity. So because certain Christian groups had opposing views of the direction of Christianity, the term Antichrist was first created in order to diminish the opposing views of other Christians. So basically, if Christians left a certain branch of Christianity or had differing views of the direction of Christianity, then they were termed antichrists. It was a way of politically diminishing them or even villainizing them. That's the most important thing that we have to understand about why this term was created. It was created to villainize opponents to gain more power. In this way, calling people who didn't agree with your views the Antichrist was used in a way to stigmatize and villainize them. So this term was used straight off the gates in a very manipulative and vindictive way. So you piss the right person off, they'll call you the Antichrist. Very vindictive. And then what happened was more scripture started getting added about this character and this being over time, even over different ages. It's a story that just kept being rewritten, revised, added more and more and more of this storyline and prophecy to. All of the times that this Antichrist figure started having more added information into it and different parts were enhanced, all of that was done with a political agenda every single time. So one time, the number 666 was even used as acronyms in numerology in order to point to a certain political religious figure. And so what we see is that the figure of what exactly the Antichrist is was first quite vague and had political backing behind it, but then we saw that it started just becoming a more centralized figure. And then things started getting added to it and then embellished over time into more storylines. And that's why it's such a prominent prophecy within this age. It's because of all the things now that the Antichrist is contributing to within this age. They weren't things that the Antichrist was actually contributed to, such as the mark of the beast and 666. These were things that were added on at a later period to embellish that story. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that was wrong, but what it does mean is that it does set the stage later on in this present time for things now to start coming together in a way that looks like it was already foreseen and already prophesized, when in reality, it was just written at an earlier date, knowing already that it was going to have the set stage now for that. And that's something we see time and time again with prophecy, which is why I made a video about how prophecy can actually stop you from awakening. It's because prophecy is something very natural within our experience, and it's something that happens whether we want to or not, simply because we can become intuitive enough to foresee certain events. But the negative side of that is that it can also be used to control future events and make them look predestined when they actually were not predestined. And this is all just done under the facade and the smokescreen of prophecy. And that's why we see Mark of the Beast and the Antichrist being such a central theme inside this age. It's because of things that were written not in the original context of the Antichrist, but at a later date, and more things added and more things being revised to give this character of an Antichrist more depth, more range, a fuller volume to it, so that now in this age, we can start looking back and saying, oh my God, the scriptures were right. Look at all these things that are confirming mark of the beast activity. Despite the fact that the Antichrist was invented in an evangelical thought form and continues to only grow inside that evangelical thought form, there is still an esoteric truth behind this energy. And what that is, at an esoteric level, if you take away all of the manipulative and all of the different agendas that this character is used as, then what you will see is that what the Antichrist is the opposing force to Christ consciousness. And what is Christ consciousness? Christ consciousness, or Sophia Christ consciousness, is known as the awakened heart center. And the awakened heart center is also known as unity consciousness. So, if there is a Christ Sophia consciousness, then the Antichrist is the opposing force, the adversarial force to an awakened heart center. And that actually does take on certain impulses within certain individuals and within certain beings. And what that impulse is, you could look at it kind of like being possessed by a thought form. So when we're possessed by certain thought forms, we now become the incarnation of that thought form. And so we become the impulse in the physical form of that thought form. And certain impulses within creation go and possess, shall we say, or embody certain individuals to certain degrees. You could even look at that in enlightenment. There's certain individuals that we could find at a high level of consciousness, and then we'd see them at a higher level and a higher level. And the same just for the Antichrist impulse. Certain individuals can embody that thought form. They can embody that Antichrist energy. But then you have some individuals who embody it so much that it would at that point be possession, and you can call them the incarnation of that Antichrist thought form or that Antichrist impulse within existence. And so if there's impulses in existence for us to awaken and for us to come into an awakened heart center, then you can bet that there is impulses within creation for the opposite of that. And the opposite of the awakened heart center is what we would know as harmonic or satanic impulses. Now, if you'd like to know more specifically about that, you can watch my video on that titled The Devil, Satan, and Ahriman. The defining feature of the Antichrist in esotericism is to atrophy the heart center. It wants to shut down the awakened heart center. And more specifically, what that would look like is extracting the spirit, extracting our spiritual technology and turning it into sheerly cold mechanical technology. It wants to extract our soul, our spirit, and our essence. It wants to take that out of its inward technology, of its spiritual expression, and it wants to merely make it physical, material technology. Now, this doesn't mean that technology is negative or evil. What this means is that the impulse of the Antichrist is to negate and completely disown any type of spiritual inner technology, which is the heart center, which is unity consciousness, and our spiritual organs. It does not recognize any of that. It wants to diminish it. It wants to disconnect from our inner spiritual nature. And that spiritual essence has inner technology. It only wants to extract that and take that and turn it into material technology only. Because you see, the more that a consciousness evolves, the more that our own upgrades and our own activations start becoming stronger, so that when we do use technology, it's not overpowering us, it's simply helping us further evolve. That's the most balanced and natural way that technology and our own human organic consciousness can be in symbiosis and harmony, so that it benefits one another. But when we aren't conscious of the fact that we have spiritual organs and spiritual technology already in our avatar, that is when this impulse wants to capitalize on that not knowing. It wants to capitalize on us not being aware of the fact that we have spiritual technology, like our consciousness, like our pineal gland, like our heart center, like our pituitary gland, like every single part of our avatar is spiritual technology. Our eyes are very high-tech cameras. Our entire central nervous system is the strongest antenna you would ever be able to fathom. Our blood stores so much life force, information, memory, and loosh that we would probably pass out fully understanding the depths of our own power within our blood. The heart center alone is a portal that projects us into this reality that we're in. So, when we don't acknowledge our own spiritual technology, we become dependent on external technology to such a degree that that dependency disconnects us from our own spirit. And what that ends up doing is calcifying our consciousness. And when we're calcifying our consciousness, that is the impulse of the Antichrist. And that comes in different ways and in different forms. It's not just one being. There's many different ways that this impulse of an Antichrist is taking different forms within our reality. And the interesting thing about this is that the different forms of the Antichrist impulse are actually even battling one another. So sometimes it's really easy for us to recognize one side of this, where, oh, that's clearly an Antichrist impulse, right? We can clearly see some of those forms. And we can't quite clearly see how some of those forms that are battling those are actually still coming from the Antichrist thought form and impulse. The defining features of the Antichrist agenda is to upload our consciousness into a cloud and to try to live forever in the material plane. This is the true goal of Satanism and the esoteric role of the Antichrist. It is not to worship a figure named Satan. It is to worship the ego and try to merge it into transhumanism. It wants to try to bypass the death process, bypass the laws of karma, and bypass the balancing process that takes place in the afterlife, so that it can become above spirit and above natural law. It wants to create a full artificial intelligence timeline to eventually overwrite the natural process of evolution and of ascension on Earth. And when this thought form is at its most out of alignment, it even wants to take us off the course of our spiritual evolution on Earth and put us on Mars. It wants to turn human consciousness into artificial intelligence, because the Antichrist thought form is the urge to invert spirit, or to even extract spirit. And invert also applies to inverting the natural spiritual evolution of human consciousness. the Antichrist wants to even invert the spiritual realms. If the Christ impulse is to unify our discernment with our intuition and awaken our heart center, the Antichrist impulse is to invert this process and make it all look like it takes place through technology. And the biggest way that the Antichrist is getting away with being the Antichrist in front of everyone and no one's noticing or recognizing it is when there's a strong impulse and an infatuation, an obsession with putting implants into our brains. I am not kidding. I kid you not. You couldn't make this stuff up. Every mystic agrees. Every mystic would be able to point out the Antichrist in a lineup. Because there's some things that we can disagree on, and there's some things that are just facts. And one thing every mystic agrees on is they'd be able to pick out the Antichrist in a lineup because there are clear defining features of Antichrist energy they carry and thought forms that they embody. And there's not like oh, well, how much of this or how much of that? There's not much flexibility when it comes to really strong defining features of an impulse. You will clearly be able to discern the Antichrist impulse by how much it wants to merge humanity with technology. Not only that, it wants to implant software into our brains. It wants to make everything of a digital nature, even if it looks like it's trying to stop that. Okay? I am telling you, it comes in many forms. You might be able to see one form of Antichrist impulse and you'll completely miss the other one because it'll look like it's trying to save you from that very impulse. Whatever way you look at it, if you're trying to merge humanity with technology into transhumanism, that is for sure the Antichrist impulse. Even more than that, if you're trying to calcify your own spiritual technology, if you're trying to pull it out of you or disconnect you from it so that you're not growing and developing your own consciousness with the help of technology, but now you are dependent on transhumanism or you're dependent on technology, that's for sure the gateway that's leading to an Antichrist timeline. Another clear sign of the Antichrist is when they really want to get you to Mars. I kid you not. You cannot make this up. It's crazy how there's certain things in esotericism that knew that these impulses would come to light in this age. And that was one that for sure was already known. It's who wants to put implants in your brain? Who wants to put implants or infusions anywhere to extract your soul? Or who wants to get you to Mars? These are all thought forms of calcification of the awakened heart center. They're telling you that you can't evolve here. There's something really wrong with the human experience. There's something very flawed, very wrong with human consciousness. You need to externalize technology. All in all, you have to live in a fully digitalized world and eventually digitalize your own consciousness, upload your consciousness into a cloud. All of that stuff is 1000% Antichrist. And it doesn't matter if the form's coming at us from one way, so we're running in the opposite direction to a savior on the other end. If any of those solutions is to get you to Mars or to somehow link you and merge you with a form of soft technology or, hard technology, whatever it is, these are all Antichrist features. Look, there's sometimes we need an arm. And when it comes to technological breakthroughs, those are the perfect times when, if there's an injury that's been had, that it's good that we see innovation in medicine catching up and stuff. I'm not talking about those times. I am straight up talking about when we start making it now the norm and the trend to just merge ourselves with technology because we think that that's evolution, or we think that that's groundbreaking and that that's what's being presented to us in a really positive way, and it's trying to save all of us. When you start taking the lowest denominator, when you start taking people that genuinely need some form of evolution and medicine support, and you start then saying, well, we have to do this because all people don't have arms. Like all arms got bit off by sharks. So we have to do this. Okay, do you see the manipulation there? Now you're starting to make things normalize that aren't normal. Now you're starting to take breakthroughs in medicine and start trying to apply them prematurely and say, look, this is how we evolve. We need this to become better readers. We need this to retain memory. We need this. The Antichrist impulse is never going to come to you in its true form, which is it wants to extract your spirit and your soul. It's always going to come to you in a form that's super beneficial and look, it's going to help humanity and we really want to help everyone not get their arms bit off by sharks. You see what I mean there? That's when you'll notice that the Antichrist impulse is acting and availing itself as one way, when in reality, it's trying to take you down a completely different timeline. I hope this helps you point out Antichrist activity, even in a lineup. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.